Hello there! Prepare to strap up and hang on tight because we've compiled a week's worth of unbelievable stories that will make your hair stand on end. We've got it all from trivial ways to spoil someone's day to dealing with emergency circumstances. So grab your popcorn, turn off the lights, and prepare for a week of adrenaline-pumping excitement. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell if you don't want to miss a single thrilling moment. What's a simple, everyday approach to mess with people? Story 1. The Key Parade. The situation. You and some friends or family are returning to your home. You, being the key holder, approach the door to unlock it. Your friends or family are ideally engaged in conversation and are generally ignorant of your activities. The trick? Go through the motion of flipping through your keys, preparing to unlock the door, realize that you have the wrong key, and flip to a new one. Then realize that you actually had the right key the first time and go back. Keep bouncing between potential successful lock candidates until someone explicitly tells you to unlock the goddamn door. If they say, "Are you going to unlock the door?" you say, "Yeah, I had the wrong key," or something dismissive. My record is about 15 minutes of people standing outside my apartment until someone eventually concludes that I have no intention of unlocking the door. Hint for success: do not painstakingly flip through every key. It's obvious and people notice. Also helps to actually try a wrong key in the door, assuming that you know it will fit. The nod along. The situation: you're in a light-hearted conversation with someone. If you do this in a serious conversation, you're a jerk. The trick? Somewhere in the middle, ideally while your partner is expounding upon a point, cease verbally replying and begin simply nodding along. See how long they will talk for before they notice that you aren't contributing to the conversation. The longer they take to notice, start disengaging, even nonverbal cues, and just stare at them blankly. Hint: ease into a state of non-reply. Some verbal responses, such as "yes, of course," that gradually become a humming should preface merely nodding. This trick is actually somewhat dangerous, as some people will never notice that you aren't responding, and you may find yourself mired in an unwanted conversation. The handoff. The situation: you're in a public place and are carrying some garbage in hand that isn't obviously garbage, for example, an empty soft drink from McDonald's. The trick? Hand the empty container to a friend and ask them to hold it for you just a sec. Fish around in both of your pockets as if you're looking for something, but don't find it. Search more pockets, check your phone, and look flustered. Never retrieve the item from their hand. Hint: engage the victim in conversation at the same time. It's a good distraction. The worrier. The situation: you're bored. The trick? Text a friend a conversation opener like, "Hey, are you there?" Don't send another message. Hint: don't do this to your mother. Story 2. So my grandma is a total neat freak. We often say that when she passes, she'll be found next to a dustbuster. I was sitting on a recliner that was near a small rug on the floor. It was a holiday or birthday, so naturally, Grandma is zooming around the house doing stuff. I decide to kick a corner of the rug up and see if she notices. Well, she comes into the living room, sees a rug askew, and flattens the corner and straightens it. This happens 2 more times. I'll flip a corner up, and she'll be passing, and flip the corner down and straighten it out. Finally, I decide to roll the rug up and put it in the coat closet. Grandma goes back and forth through the room at least 5 times before she stops and goes, "Something in here is different." At that point, myself and all the family members that had watched the entire thing take place start cracking up. I got up and grabbed the rug from the closet, and Grandma put it all together and started cracking up with us. One of my favorite memories of a family gathering. Might sound like I'm just a jerk, but she loved little innocent stuff like that. Story 3. For almost 3 months, I would drive by my best friend's house after every day except trash day. He always put the bin in the same corner next to his garage, so throughout the week leading up to trash day, I moved the bin slightly closer to the house. I had a system. He'd always move it back to the corner, but every day I'd move it. About a month in, he started mentioning the moving bin in conversation. "I think someone's messing with my trash." Nah, stop being paranoid. In the last week that I did this, the buildup was showing. He would go home to check more often, even going as far as to install a bunch of motion sensor lights. Now, being his best friend, I had knowledge of where he kept a spare key to his house, so finally, the day before trash day, I put the bin in his house. He went insane. We're talking about cameras outside, even shopping for security systems. I never told him. Sorry, Dan. Story 4. I hated my old job and just wanted to make everyone as miserable as I was. So I downloaded a high-pitched frequency app that plays a super high-pitched noise, like dog whistle high-pitch. I sat at my desk and did it about 3 times a day in short 5 to 10 second bursts for almost 6 months. We had 4 people in our area, and the boss man's office entrance was close to my desk. I would play the sound and then pretend that I didn't hear anything when everyone started to freak out. My boss hired like 8 IT guys over the course of 6 months and probably spent $1,000 trying to find the phantom noise, thinking it was a fax machine or copier or someone's computer speakers. Our big boss even came down on him, asking why he had spent a bunch of money on IT workers. I got my lols and found a better job. Wonder if he ever put it together it was me. Well, at least we know that everyone in the office believes in Santa Claus. They would for sure get approved for a ticket on the Polar Express. Story 5. My time to shine. In a big open area, just quickly look upwards and look incredulous as to what you see, and notice as more and more people around you look up to see what's going on. Works great at Disneyland. Pick out a guy and a girl name, David and Sarah work great, and when you see someone in a large crowd, look confused and tentatively ask, David? If their name is David, they'll be so confused, but if they aren't David, they won't get mad either because they understand mistaking someone from your past. If someone is wearing a shirt with wording on it and you're walking towards them, whisper the words of their shirt right as they're passing you. Always leads to a great deal of confusion. If someone goes on a long tangent or tells a long story, wait a couple seconds and ask, "What do you mean, you people?" Pretend to not know what potatoes are. You know, potatoes. Boil 'em, mash 'em, stick 'em in a stew. Story 6. I work at a grocery store. From time to time, I'll ask customers, do you have any coupons today? If asked to repeat the question, I'll switch the word back to coupons, just to mess with them. I'll also subtly substitute shoot card for chip card, and as they leave, I'll tell them to have a grape day. There was an internet post about a guy who put small insults randomly in coworkers' post-it pads and how the coworker was slowly driven mad until he cracked at the office. Mimicking people's body language, but you have to know you're doing it actively. Subtly touching your nose and ears and watching people do the same subconsciously is way more fun than it should be. When I'm driving by myself, I'll put some ridiculous face where I try to look both confused and despondent. That way, just in case anyone sees me, they'll think, geez, what's up with that guy? Story 7. I work in a cubicle setting and change the sensitivity of each computer's mouse to varying degrees. Listening to coworkers yell, stop, or come on, inanimate objects are a real treat. As a woman, when you walk by an unknown couple, casually say hi to the man and keep walking. Allow everyone to enter the elevator before you, as a gesture of kindness. Then when you enter the elevator, stand facing the back wall. It's amazing how uncomfortable people get in such a short time. If I'm talking to someone and we're both standing, I'll take a tiny step forward to get in their personal space. They'll eventually step back, then I'll do it some more. If I'm careful and the conversation lasts long enough, I can steer them across the room. Story 8. I once rode a ferry during some hockey thing going on, and the cafeteria was loaded with annoying buttholes screaming at the TV. So I downloaded a remote app for my phone, checked that I had the right programming selected, and right when it looked like someone was about to score, I turned it off. And man, would they scream. And several guys lunged at the remote lying on the table and actually struggled to be the one turning on the TV again. One time it got so bad, security had to step in and tell them to calm the frick down or they would have police waiting for them at the port. I think that's the only time I've enjoyed watching sports on TV. Story 9. My ex-boss used to go crazy if the department phone rang more than 3 times without someone picking it up, even though our space was huge and we couldn't always reach the phone before the 3rd ring. If we were even in the department when it rang. Oh, and his office was right beside the desk where the main phone was, and he could answer it from his own phone too, but he wouldn't. So one day I'd had enough of that and programmed the main phone line to forward to his direct line. I left it like that for a week. He raged every day. Why are all these people calling me for this junk? It was a good week. Story 10. Decide on a victim. Watch their eyes as you interact with them. Whenever they look at your left eye or to something on your left, speak just a little bit more loudly. Whenever they look at your right eye or to something on your right, speak just a little bit more softly. Whenever they use a buffering phrase, something like or bob your head slightly. Time your breathing so that you're exhaling while they are inhaling. Finally, and most importantly, if they ever pause for more than 2 seconds, kick them in the shins, then hand them a random amount of money. Refuse to acknowledge any of the above if challenged. When a salesman talked himself out of a sale. Story 1. Was looking to buy solar panels for my house. Got one consultation from a really nice saleswoman who was very friendly, but completely knew her stuff inside and out. Had done her research, had printouts of my house's roof from Google Earth, showed me how the panels would lay out, etc. I told her I was going to get a few other quotes, and she said that was perfectly fine, and please just let her know what I decided. So I called around and set up 3 other quotes. First 2 were fine, just more expensive or not on good terms overall. Third place, though, Varango Solar, yikes. I got a call from their sales guy who refused to come to the property, saying he could do it all from the office. So he looks at the roof printout and tells me that he can offer around 2/3 of the panels as the other companies. I ask why, and he basically says, because. So I say 3 other companies are offering between 17 and 18 panels, whereas they only do 13. He claims they're wrong and gives me some nonsense reasoning. I say, okay, well, at least they're cheap. So I tell him thanks, I'm going to go over all my options, and I'd call him in a few days. I got calls from him every day for the next 3 days. After 2 days of still thinking, he comes back to me and says he's figured out how the other companies got more panels on the roof. They rotated them differently. Go figure. On the 3rd day, I said I wasn't interested. Thank you. So I got a call that same day from his manager asking why I wasn't interested. I told him that even though they were the cheapest, their inept sales attitude and extremely pushy manner from every person I'd talked to there made me never want to do business with them ever. He tried to talk me out of my opinion about them, and I calmly told him to never call me back here again, please, and hung up. Meanwhile, the nice lady at the other company, now Sunrun, hadn't bothered me once. I called her and said, let's do it, and haven't regretted it one day since. She also worked her butt off to get me a very close price to the cheapest option, even after I told her I was going with her company. It ended up only being like $300 more than the cheapest place. Story 2. I was broke but desperately needed a new car, so I went down to a local dealership to see if they had anything with a monthly payment I could afford. I handed over the keys to my car so they could do an appraisal, but I didn't even get a chance to fully explain my situation before they were shoving me in an Infiniti I knew was beyond my price range. I test drove it just to humor the sales guy while explaining that I needed something cheaper than this, but he just kept saying, we'll see how the financing works out. We get back to the dealership, and he tells me he wants to run my credit. The pushiness has already turned me off completely, so I've already decided I'm not buying from them. I tell him no. He looks at me like I just threw poop in his face. You won't let me run your credit? He said with stunned incredulity. And then he started calling out to the other salesman. He won't let me run his credit, can you believe that? The other salesmen all shared his shock, like I was committing some unforgivable insult by not letting him run my credit. Next thing I know, I'm being herded into a manager's office where he starts giving me this spiel about how I clearly don't appreciate how much they're trying to help me out. But I don't want the car, I said. He continued on like I said nothing, telling me how much they're trying to help me out and how I don't realize what a great deal they can make me. I have finally had enough though, so I said, listen, I'm not buying that car from you, and at this point there is nothing you can say or do to get me to buy any car from you, so give me back the keys to my car so I can go somewhere else. And then he actually said to me, I'll give you back your keys when I'm ready. He realized almost immediately that he had messed up, though, because as soon as he said it, he got up and went and got the keys. At that point, I was so enraged that I probably would have punched him if I hadn't gotten up to get them immediately. I drove off and never went back. TLDR, went used car shopping and used car salesman tried to bully and intimidate me into buying a car I didn't want and couldn't afford anyway. One word, Thunder Kruger Falkenberg. But yeah, this guy really blew it. They should have taken the hint early on and at least tried to save face by not turning it into a hostage situation. People don't like to be pressured into buying things that they don't want. Why do you think we all hate ads so much? They're annoying as heck and in our face everywhere we look. So having a human be this pushy and soliciting a sale is a real turnoff. Story 3. My dad and I were out shopping for my first car. Me being 16 and stupid, I found a used Challenger that I wanted desperately. And to my immense surprise, my dad agreed to co-sign for me. As my dad and I were negotiating the price of the car and what things the dealership could add to sweeten the deal, the salesman implied that I, my father's 16-year-old daughter, was his other woman, and that my 42-year-old father was going through a midlife crisis. My father turned white, and then the same beautiful cherry red of the Challenger. And needless to say, I did not get that car. Instead of getting a cool car that I would have inevitably gotten a surplus number of speeding tickets with, I bought my aunt's '99 Ford Explorer. After replacing parts of the AC system, it runs like a champ. I love that SUV. Edit: the Explorer is a small American SUV. It is bigger than most European first cars. I know it's terrifying that a licensed 16-year-old would drive it. If it's any consolation, I spent most of my time driving in very rural areas my first 6 years driving. Yes, the insurance would have been absolutely astronomical if I had actually managed to get the Challenger. In hindsight, I'm fairly certain it was my dad attempting to show me how to buy a car from a dealership. 16-year-old me thought he was cool as heck for at least entertaining the idea. My father is not Roy Moore. We're from Georgia, not Alabama. You gotta wait till they're 18 to diddle your relatives in Georgia. Story 4. We were looking for a particular style of furniture and went around town checking all the shops to see what was in stock. You can barely even walk in the door before being set upon by a salesman, but at most of the places we'd say, "We're just looking." And they'd be all, "Great," and back off, waiting for signs that we might be interested in something so they could swoop back in. But this one place, it was like dealing with those street vendors who leap on the windshield of your car with a squeegee at a stoplight. We'd say, "We're just looking," and he'd say, "Okay," take 2 steps back, then leap forward and say things like, "Just for you, I can probably get free delivery." Jesus Christ, dude, we haven't even looked at anything yet, and you're trying to deliver it for us? It was so obvious that the deals he was offering were what the manager had told him to use for negotiations, and he was so excited that he was prematurely blowing his haggle load all over us. We ended up not even walking through the entire store because he was hassling us so badly. I feel this one. The one piece of furniture that we bought so far that's not from Craigslist or a hand-me-down was our couch. We went into the furniture store and, just like this OP said, we were swarmed by sales reps. I guess they have a code amongst themselves that the first one to make contact gets dibs on following through with the sale. So this one lady got to us first and took down our email, which we would later learn was a mistake. She proceeded to remain glued to our hip as we tried to browse the store, but kept interrupting us and being really pushy with trying to sell us super expensive stuff that we totally were not interested in, and matching tables and stuff that we didn't want or need. It turned us off, so we left and didn't buy anything from that store, drove across the city to the sister store location, and here we were met with a much more casual and understanding salesman. He gave us space to walk around and decide on our own which couch we liked, and we ultimately went through with the purchase. Come to find out, though, that the commission that he should have received from the sale was split 50-50 with the other sales rep because she was the one who took down our email. So, lesson learned, don't give out any customer info until you're actually ready to buy. Story 5. Not me, but my parents. My mom and dad were meeting with a sales guy who worked for a pool company when they were looking to get a pool built. He was a standard sales guy, and at one point tried to mention some add-on or something. My mom started to interject, and the sales guy was basically like, "Oh, don't worry. Why don't your husband and I talk about the money details?" He said a few other things along those lines and was overly condescending. The whole, "how about you sit tight while the men talk business" sort of mentality. My mom looked at the guy for a second, then to my dad, then stood up and said, "You know what? I think we're done here." As she and my dad stood up to leave, the sales guy apparently kind of stammered, then smirked, looked at my dad and said, "Oh, come on, let's continue," thinking it was some joke. My dad responded, "Nope, you heard my wife, we're out of here." And that was that. Story 6. I went to a gun store to buy a gun to end my life. Since it was a purchase for a single use, I didn't want to spend a lot of money. The salesman was this giant macho gym bro who was pushy and condescending and emasculated me for wanting to buy a cheap gun. He was so aggressive and intimidating that he ended up embarrassing me by buying a gun at all. I just got super nervous and left the store and didn't commit seppuku. Edit. About half the replies to this comment are just people asking me why I wanted a cheap gun. Firstly, I am poor and couldn't have afforded the guns dude was trying to sell me anyway. And also, I thought that anything of value I owned would be better off going to my family rather than being pawned to buy a really fancy gun just to impress some D-bag salesman at the gun store. I wish I could say I'm surprised by how ignorant and insensitive people on the internet are. Hirers, what did a candidate wear to an interview that cost them the job? Story 1. I sometimes do campus recruiting and interviews, but don't make final hiring decisions. With that said, at a campus event, my partner and I were going through a line of over 300 people. We scan their resume, ask a bunch of questions to get them in our system, and add some quick comments and suggestions. Had a person wait in line for several hours. When she got to me, she had no resume and still had on pajamas. Now, I never try to judge a book by its cover, but I have to get through a person in under 4 minutes on average and have about 20 questions to ask to put info for HR into our system. I was ready to power through this as fast as possible to get to a candidate that was an actual potential hire. However, this girl was graduating with a 4.0 BS in computer science at the age of 17. She spoke 7 languages fluently. I could not verify this. She said that she'd started working on PhD research when she was 14. But didn't want to continue with school. I had to convince her to go make a resume, as I could not complete her in our system without it, and wanted to make sure she was visible to the right people. Honestly, I was surprised she even wanted to work at a Fortune 500 company. It's a great start for most people, but I would think prodigies would have other options than a $70K salary in Texas. She did go make a resume, and waited in line again. I made sure HR found her profile, but I have no idea if she signed on with us. I'm surprised a prodigy finishing computer science at 17 and already working on a PhD thesis wasn't interested in going to academia. As someone who knows a lot of smart people, academia is absolutely not for everyone. Dad quit a tenured professorship because he couldn't freaking deal with the poopy parts of the job. Story 2. I think the fad of using room scent and laundry scent is behind this. Some bozo chooses to use gain and bounce and scented candles, etc., etc. They're breathing strong synthetic fragrance nonstop 24/7. That numbs their sense of smell, so that they can't smell their perfume or cologne unless they use a crazy amount. For example, the stinkiest person I ever encountered was a physiotherapist who happened to make a little rant about how unprofessional healthcare workers who use scent are. Because it blocks access to a basic need for tons of people who have reactions like asthma. I had to tell them that I almost got knocked over by his fume cloud when he was anything closer than maybe 20 feet away. He was stunned. Turns out his wife does the shopping and laundry, so he didn't notice she was choosing scented products, and it was so strong it basically killed his sense of smell. Had no idea he wasn't unscented. Basically boasted about being unscented, but was extremely offensively scented. Like you touch a pen after he does, and your hand stinks the rest of the day. And he did not know. Wild. In this case, he was not using cologne, it was laundry scent, and maybe room scent. But his case illustrates how trusting your nose to tell you how scented you are just does not work. Story 3. Obligatory, not a hirer, but an interviewee. I went for an interview at an insurance firm when I was 19. I was wearing office wear, so smart casual. But when I left my house, I realized it was tipping it down, so went back inside to grab my jacket, which was an Adidas striped hoodie type jacket. I literally didn't think anything of it. I got to my interview, took the jacket off as soon as I entered the building, and hung it up on the hook because it was soaking wet. Had my interview, thought it went well, and just as I was grabbing my jacket off the hook, my interviewer told me maybe for next time I went for an interview to leave the jacket at home, as it looked unprofessional. That makes me think poorly of them, not you. My word, formal raincoats are costly, and you'd only use one a handful of times per decade. Why should an unemployed person waste their money on having one handy just on the off chance it rains during their trip to an interview? Well, how dare you be unemployed for 19 years? It's obviously his fault. I'm not sure if this is a popular opinion or if I'm in the minority here, but I actually prefer when business people wear their casual clothes. I just find them more trustworthy and authentic in, let's say, an athletic wear jacket than I would find them in a business trench coat or a sports jacket or a full-on suit and tie. Fashion and formal wear is one thing if it genuinely makes you feel good about yourself, and it's great for fancy occasions like weddings and such. But for some reason, when I interact with people in a business setting and they're all dressed up, I just tend to feel like they're putting on a front and are trying to sell me something or accomplish something from their own agenda. I guess it also depends heavily on the individual's personality. I know certainly there are exceptions, like Review Bra, for instance, aka the Report of the Week. He's a YouTuber who has dressed in full-on suits and ties for every video he makes reviewing fast food and stuff like that. But I've never gotten the impression that he was trying to dupe me. It's just his personal style preference, which is totally fine. And in a case that's very unique, it's the fake salesman, though, and the finance bros that get under my skin. Story 4. I was doing the hiring for an entry-level retail job. An interviewer called and said he was running late because his other job kept him late. Okay, no problem, really. I got a call from the service desk that the guy showed but was running down to the restroom. My coworker and I went to the common area and waited. About 5 minutes passed, and we were just sitting there BSing for a few. Finally, after literally 15 minutes, I had my coworker head down and see if maybe the guy was lost or didn't know where to go. Then my coworker and this guy came walking to the interview table, and apparently this guy decided to hurry up and shave first. His face was bleeding from 6 to 7 spots, and he had toilet paper on them. We didn't end up hiring him, but it was really because his interview was absolutely terrible. I kind of felt bad for him because he obviously was really trying hard to make a good impression. Story 5. I've had candidates bomb out of interviews for various reasons, but only one that killed her candidacy by being poorly dressed. Coworker, Pete, knows I'm hiring and tells me about Jean. I need to hire Jean. Jean is the best. Jean's CV puts her in the middle of the pack, so we ask her to come in for an interview. Jean is wearing a beach cover-up and a shirt over a swimsuit. Jean has finger-combed her hair out at best. She's wearing heels. At the time, our office only allowed jeans on Fridays and required collared shirts on men every day. Apparently, she felt that her friendship with Pete gave her a leg up, so she didn't bother. She was not hired. Wow, if a friend referred me, I would be on my best behavior so as to not embarrass them. Incidentally, this is also why I will almost never recommend anyone else unless I know that I know they will not make me look bad. My friend recommended me for a job, and I still stressed out about making him look bad several months after being hired. Story 6. Unusual one, in my opinion. My wife interviews a lot of people for therapy roles of varying types. There's usually a group interview after the initial ones, and all the coworkers said they wouldn't hire a woman because of her shoes. The candidate had Louis Vuitton shoes on. The reasons they gave were she probably wants too much money, not that she doesn't even need the job, and perceived her as a person they wouldn't get along with. She ultimately didn't get past the first interview. I asked my wife about it, and she said she didn't even notice what she had on her feet. She didn't hire her because her experience was with adults and not children. Oh, that's messed up. What if she saved up for months to buy good shoes? What if she borrowed them? Wow. Yeah, as someone on a low wage, I always save and buy good shoes. They last longer and are better for your feet. If you're on your feet all day, never scrimp on footwear. Buying cheap is false economy. You end up replacing more often. Also, they could have been a gift. Story 7. I once went to an interview in which my skirt split up the back as my interviewer followed me up the stairs. I was told I was too confident for the job. Oh my God, that's got to be a top 10 nightmare for me. It was bad enough the time when I was at work, had worked there a couple of years, and was wearing a long skirt that had a slit to just above the knee. Somehow, as the day progressed, the seam above the slit started letting go, and the slit got higher and higher and higher until finally it was nearly to the top of my thigh. Thankfully, the office was almost entirely women, and they all just laughed it off. When I was in college, the only jeans I could afford were the cheap ones from Walmart. At least once a semester, I'd go to sit down in a chair in class, and my jeans would split right up the butt, and everyone could see my underwear. I don't buy jeans from Walmart anymore. Story 8. A very experienced career sales guy applied for a full-time sales gig at our store. He came in about a week before his formal interview, just to say hi and introduce himself to the manager. He had arrived wearing a Hawaiian shirt, board shorts, and thongs, flip-flops for you filthy Americans. As he had come in unannounced, and it wasn't formal yet, this was fine. However, the next week when he arrived for his formal interview, he was dressed in the exact same outfit. I just couldn't believe it. We weren't sure if he was just that confident that he would be hired because of his experience, or whether he legitimately didn't give a care. This guy's interview lasted all about 5 minutes. He did not get hired, and instead we hired a 23-year-old with zero sales experience who actually worked out great. I'm British, and I still did a double take. In my experience working in IT, and especially post-COVID with everyone going full-time remote working from home, a Hawaiian shirt and shorts with flip-flops would be totally acceptable. I'm just so glad that my days working at places that required uniforms or formal business attire are over. To me, it really does seem that nowadays, if your company is down to earth, they really don't give a care if you're on calls in your casual loungewear. So long as you're competent with the work that you provide, it shouldn't even matter in the first place. Kids, when did you realize your parents might be terminally stupid? Story 1. My parents have a tendency to never change their incorrect opinions, even in the face of facts. Some examples. My parents had a rocky patch in their relationship, and when they got over it, they joined one of those multi-level marketing schemes that had them buy audiobooks and travel to conferences to learn how to be happy. I think it was called Life or something, and they got really mad at me when I told them it was a crappy MLM scheme and refused to sit through the seminars with them. My dad believes almost every conspiracy theory that exists. His biggest one is that the government is using chemtrails to test biological weapons on us. My boyfriend was a pilot and tried to explain why this was ridiculous, but my dad would have none of it. He also sees climate change as a huge conspiracy. My mom thinks that preventative medicine is a waste of money and refuses to ever go to the doctors, gyno, or take her beloved dog to the vet. Luckily, all of her children were vaccinated. Every week, she buys some new homeopathic remedy, such as some low pH water that costs $15 a bottle that will prevent you from getting cancer, or some magnesium liquid stuff that you rub on your feet for some reason or other. My parents are convinced eating red meat or GMOs will kill you. At one point, I was working as a researcher in a genetics lab. I got into a heated discussion with my mom and showed her many sources to back my claims on GMOs, and she was unable to come up with a single source for her own claims, and it ended with her telling me that her opinion is just as valid as mine, and that I don't know more than her. Never mind the fact that I have 2 science degrees, and she has never taken a science class outside of high school, and has no idea what a peer-reviewed paper looks like. My mom is a heavy smoker and accepts that smoking can lead to lung cancer, but will argue that eating red meat is much worse for you than smoking, based on zero evidence. She sees her smoking as a tiny problem in comparison. My parents are also both very easily influenced by political propaganda, and it makes it very difficult for me to see eye to eye with them. At this point, I just avoid talking to them about most topics. Story 2. My parents are well educated, but this was one of the stupidest things I've seen them do. I was in the basement playing video games and went upstairs to my parents, frantically looking for me. They were in that anger relief kind of state and told me they'd been looking for me for hours and were about to call the cops. Here's the thing. I had my phone on me the entire time and had received no calls or texts or messages from either of them. Also, none of them ever went down to the basement to check if I was there. Otherwise, they would have seen me. I couldn't have really left the house either because I wasn't old enough to drive at the time. I don't know what was going through their minds, but it definitely wasn't common sense. I would have loved to see the police officers' faces if they found me in the basement after they called the cops. When I was a kid, I lived on a military base, and a woman called to say her kid was missing. The whole base went on a lockdown while everyone frantically searched for this kid. An officer asked to come in and sit with the mom and wait to see if the kid showed up while everyone else was out looking. He walks in the house and the kid is laying on the couch under a blanket. I'm going to chalk this one up to the general phenomenon that is parent poo brain, especially after years of having your brain divided between the gazillion responsibilities that just come with being an adult that also has to take care of a kid, coupled with lack of sleep, and that innate sense of worry. Parent brains just don't function at their fullest capacity anymore. So they deserve some forgiveness in that regard. Story 3. When my parents just got through complaining they couldn't afford basics. Then my mother went and bought 2 $200 pillows and some fancy towels. They've never bought a home. They say they were priced out, but their stuff is all top of the line. They live in an expensive rental area. I offered to buy them a place, a quarter of the rent price. My dad, quote, must live near the ocean, so they keep struggling. Mom wants to move up here. When Dad worked, he made really good money, $75 to $80 an hour. Never saved a penny. Now he has his Social Security check and still wishes to live as if he makes $80 an hour. We have a big home in a rural area we could add on to or buy a cabin for them with some of our savings, effectively lowering their rent. They had opportunity after opportunity to buy and still wish they had. I'll give you an example of how they deal with things. One day, Mom got back to work and noticed her car was gone. Dad was in the parking lot waiting for her, in a new Mercedes. He had gone and sold both their car and truck, bought a 2-seater sports car and a giant boat. They couldn't tow the boat without the truck. These are my parents. This seems like entitlement more than stupidity. Story 4. I asked my mom for Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo for my 8th or 9th birthday. She had no idea what I was talking about, so I explained what the game was. For those who may not know, it had all the original NES Mario games, Super Mario World, and one other Mario game that I think was previously unreleased. The SNES was still new, so games were expensive, but that was literally all I had asked for, so I was fairly confident. A couple of weeks went by, and I didn't really think much about it. On my birthday, I came home from school to a big wrapped box, much bigger than the game. I tore into it and opened up the box to find an old Nintendo. Next to it were cartridges for the first 3 Mario games. I was so confused. Mom, it's exactly what you wanted. It is? Yes, I took your Super Nintendo and to the swap meet and traded it in for the games that you wanted. It's been over 20 years and she hasn't gotten any better. This post has genuinely made me recoil in horror. Well done. This is a classic mom faux pas, referring to any type of video game as a Nintendo. Whether it's PlayStation, Xbox, PC, doesn't matter. There was just such prominence, I guess, with the wave of Nintendo permeating American households in the early years of home video games, that it just stuck. Kind of like the debacle with Kleenex and Band-Aids. Both are brand names that older generations just use ubiquitously to refer to tissues and bandages. Story 5. Years ago, I was building a potato cannon, which my father was uninterested in, thinking it was just stupid, until he saw me working on it in the garage. I had the cannon in the vise and had just put in an electric barbecue igniter and wired it to some bolts inside to get a good spark. Suddenly, he's very interested. I had just managed to get a perfect gap with a strong arc, and he says, "Wait, let go of the button for a second," and sprays quick start, basically aerosol ether, and goes, "Okay, hit it now." Nothing happened. Both ends of the cannon are open, so it's just a tube, and the quick start he sprayed just dissipated too quickly. "Okay, hold the button for a sec." I'm not even thinking about what he's about to do at this moment, and he aimed the spray right at the live arc and created a fireball that came straight for his face, singeing his one eyebrow and corner of his mustache. I can't imagine what he thought was going to happen. Just like the simulations. Story 6. Every Friday, my mother goes grocery shopping. It's a block away, and she usually drives there. On this particular day, after she finished shopping, she decides to walk back. The next morning, she woke me and my father up to let us know her car was stolen. Cops come, we fill out paperwork, and in the meanwhile, she gets a rental car. That's not even the best part. The following Friday, she drives again to the grocery market and parks right next to her stolen car, which is a champagne-colored Mitsubishi Diamante, not such a common car or color. She comments how similar the car looks like hers, but makes nothing of it. A few days later, the cops called us to let us know the car was in the grocery store's parking lot 1 block away. Yeah, I got plenty of other stories, but that's probably the best one. I feel like that's a sign of something more serious. Story 7. When I was in 4th grade, my mother insisted on helping with my homework for some reason. I was always a smart kid. I never needed help, but she forced me to let her help. She proceeded to redo my math and spelling homework, and I failed both assignments. I told her those answers were wrong, and she fought me on it. When I got to school, I cried and told the teacher my mom made me put wrong answers, and I told her I knew the right ones, but my mom forced me to let her help. The teacher laughed, took my paper, and asked me the questions. After I got 2 right immediately, she marked everything on the page wrong and gave it back to me. She told me not to worry. She put 100% in the grade book. She just wanted me to show that one to my mom. Years ago, I remember seeing advertisements for a show with Jeff Foxworthy called Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader? It seemed to do a pretty good job highlighting the vast amount of rote memorization that kids learn in school that ultimately isn't directly used as an adult when we branch off into our own specialties. Of course, you want to pepper in a bit of everything when you're young, so you get a taste of all the knowledge that the world has to offer you, but then inevitably most of it fades away, and you realize the things that you actually want or need to know in order to succeed in life and be happy. People who realized they had bad therapists, what were the red flags? Story 1. In high school, about a year and a half after my anorexia diagnosis, I was finally put through to a specialist psychologist at a dedicated state eating disorder service. It was a 3-hour drive to get there, and I was really hoping this would be what helped me get my life back. It was a male therapist, and that made me anxious because all my previous therapists had been females, and I was really uncomfortable around men. I had to do a lot of paperwork and questionnaires about my history, my body, how I felt, etc. The red flags started showing when he didn't take notes in our sessions. He filmed them. I signed a form saying it was okay, but it was very unnerving. It made me so anxious, and I would spend a lot of time in the sessions just staring at the camera and dissociation. Another thing was that he didn't mention anything at all about my eating disorder, self-harm, anxiety, depression, nothing. He never asked about anything like that at all. I felt like I was making no progress whatsoever after the first couple of sessions, but I felt like I had to keep coming back because he was a specialist and it was very expensive. I think I attended maybe 5 sessions, and all I can remember was him telling me that I was a monster and evil, and the real me was trying to get out, but the evil side of me was keeping her in. He also went into great detail about how my traumatic birth and illnesses as a premature newborn, not being able to be held for ages, etc., had left me unable to feel love, and how lonely I must be. It all came to a head when, the night before my appointment, I received an email from the clinic saying that he had resigned. I felt so betrayed, and this was just after my last psychologist had gone on maternity leave and discharged me, so I was very sensitive to feeling abandoned. He knew this. There was absolutely no warning at all. 1 week it was fine, then the next, he left. It was incredibly traumatic, and I seriously declined while I was under this care. My anxiety bordered on OCD. I had rituals I had to follow, was binging and purging often, and was dissociating a lot of the time. I actually went back there a couple of years ago to request a copy of my file and the tapes. I wanted to see if it was as bad as I remembered, or if I was just overreacting or making it all up. I went there, and all they had was my questionnaires. They contacted the man, but he said he had deleted the videos. He violated the contract and the policy of the clinic. All files were supposed to be kept for 7 years after turning 18, or at request, they would be destroyed. They gave me the paperwork I needed to lodge a formal complaint against this man. I did a search for him, and he's still practicing. I hope his other clients didn't have to suffer like I did, and I don't know how he sleeps at night. Story 2. I was in high school. During the process of getting to know each other, details came out, and when he realized that I drank and smoked but didn't have any intimate relationships with anyone, he goes, so it's okay to drink and smoke weed but not have relations? That's some backwards logic. He said it like he was personally offended. For starters, buddy, I'm here for you to help me move past my mother's passing and my dad remarrying. I'm not here for you to tear apart my morals and tell me why your opinion is better. And second, it's my freaking body. If I decide to drink and smoke but not to stick my dong in crazy freaking high school girls, that's my prerogative. Smoking a J never got anyone pregnant or gave them an STD. I don't think that stuff is wrong. I was just wholly uninterested when I was in high school, for Pete's sake. We had been talking about an ex who broke up with me because I wouldn't sleep with her, and he proclaimed that I should have just effed her so she'd stay around. Like, I'm sorry, what? I'm supposed to give up my virginity and morals to keep some high school hussy around? And then I realized this dude just encouraged a 16-year-old boy to sleep with his girlfriend so she wouldn't leave him. And that's when I realized this dude was not for me. My goal was not to have my morals torn apart and questioned. My goal was to move past the passing of my mother and find happiness. Story 3. I'm beginning to think maybe my therapist wasn't all that great. Every week, she'd ask me how things had been that week, and she'd pick out something from what I said, and we'd talk over that in detail. But she never seemed to recall an awful lot about the things we'd discussed before, and we never actually moved forward to doing any kind of work or anything. I just turned up, talked for an hour, and then left. I ran out of coverage for the sessions after 6 months, and she agreed with me at that point that I hadn't really made any progress at all, and that I hadn't succeeded in changing anything really. Her only advice was, have you tried just not thinking these thoughts? She recommended a particular YouTube video about mindfulness as I was leaving for the last time, but also told me I need to spend less time thinking about things and over-focusing. I don't really know what I'm supposed to take away from that. I think this is what a lot of people view as another hurdle in taking the leap to finally seek help for themselves, and it's already a massive achievement in taking the first step to improving your mental health by just deciding to get professional help in the first place. But if the stigma and self-doubting wasn't already enough, now there's an added layer of questioning whether your time and money will actually be well spent, especially when all that really occurred in this OP's sessions could now easily be accomplished by artificial intelligence. Just spitting back out input that you feed the therapist with no narrative built around your issues or progression towards coping or resolving them. At least with AI, it can build out a database of things you mentioned to recall information from past sessions. I hope this incident didn't deter the OP from continuing the healing process elsewhere. Story 4. I was abused as a child by my mother's stepbrother. I was always under the assumption that she knew about it because I was in therapy from age 4 until I started high school. I lived with my dad because of it. Our insurance changed, so I had to change to a new therapist. So abuse, PTSD, parental alienation from my mother, depression, and self-harm to start. The new therapist flat out told me she didn't believe what had happened during our first session together. I went to the waiting area and grabbed my dad, who also reiterated why I was there. She told him he was doing me no favors by indulging my delusion. We had a current restraining order against this guy as well. She really soured any future attempts for me to open up to professionals because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Thankfully, I'm in a much better place now and have been for a good while. Story 5. This thread is so tough to read. Bad therapists can ruin lives. You are in such a hard place that you push through your fears and reach out for help, a step that can take years because it's so scary. Being met in that tremendously difficult moment and state of vulnerability by an unprofessional pea-brain is devastating and can make you want to give up. I had several lousy people pretending to help me before I found the right therapist, thanks to a friend who also works in the field. There are plenty of red flags here to look out for, so here are some green flags to keep in mind. They are passionate and attend courses and seminars regularly. They are part of an association and are recommended. They never blame you, lose their patience with you, or tell you that you can leave if you don't like it. They have had therapy themselves. This is very, very, very important. Story 6. Psychiatrist, actually. I was talking about the impact of my dad's alcoholism, and he tried to justify it. He's a grown man. He can do what he wants. I got angry, but decided to shrug it off. Then I talked about the financial burden that my mom was stuck with as a result of my dad's drinking and reckless spending. Again, he defended it. He can use his money however he likes. I snapped at that point. I told him that my father had a responsibility to put a roof over our heads and food on the table. I also said that my mother shouldn't have to rack up thousands of dollars of debt while he's getting wasted and totaling our car. He started shouting at me about how little I know, how my role as a woman is to not speak out against men, etc. I got fed up, so I called him a quack and walked out. Story 7. She was angry and impatient, kept pushing me for information I obviously wasn't comfortable with opening up to. Then she dismissed me, saying I was just sad or lazy and garbage, and not really depressed. Then she made a joke about how bad it could be, since I'm a guy. It's not like I was art or anything. I remember shutting down at that point and just saying what she wanted to hear and then left. Made me super seppuku for weeks after, as I was molested as a kid and was in an abusive relationship at the time where I was being R'd daily. Every time I go by that cursed building, I want to pull in and find some way to get her fired. But I doubt I could even remember her face anymore. It was several years ago. Been on the waiting list for a therapist since at the only other place in the city. I was under the impression that a therapist's main objective was to be a person who validates how you're feeling and then helps you address them in a healthy way. Seems like the last thing you'd want to do is downplay what your patient is experiencing and force them to internalize it even more. They should feel open about sharing their innermost thoughts and emotions. But if they're constantly told their feelings are dismissible, then they're not going to be comfortable continuing the conversation and won't make any progress. Story 8. Not me, but a friend. Therapist always had an observer in sessions. Their behavior was very blame-oriented. They blamed my friend for feeling the way they did, instead of trying to work through the issues leading them to feel that way. Therapist sided with others whom my friend was trying to work through feelings and issues with. Therapist openly told my friend they were overreacting to situations that were brought on by anxiety and that my friend should chill out. I had no idea until my friend burst into tears one day. I told them to end the sessions and complain straight away. Such horrendous, harmful behavior, and it was all witnessed by someone else. Luckily, they found a fabulous therapist after, but it was so damaging and set them back years in recovery. Doctors who've actually answered the question, is anyone here a doctor? What happened? Story 1. Well, the doctor in question is my father, not myself. But we were on a plane coming home from vacationing in Florida when, during the latter third of our flight, a man came stumbling down the aisle and nearly fell down as he passed our row. A few of us started to get up, asking if he was all right, and he quickly got up and darted into the bathroom. But not before we saw that his skin was a horrible ash gray. Dad speculated that he was having some kind of diabetic emergency. Guy disappeared into the bathroom and was in there for a long time. And after a while, the most horrific smell began to waft out. A flight attendant eventually went to check on him, opening the door just a crack. The smell filled the whole plane, and was soon joined by more attendants. And after some talking amongst themselves, one asked, "Is anyone a doctor on board?" My father stood up and dutifully went back there, and when he opened the door to go in, we could all see that there was doo-doo all over the door and walls of the bathroom. Turned out the guy had consumed a lot of wine and shrimp cocktails for what would have been breakfast, and obviously something went awry. So that kicked off a half-hour or more sort of standoff where the flight staff tried to convince the man to let them take him off in a wheelchair, during which they turned off the AC and had us all close our windows and stay in our seats on a sweltering summer afternoon, while the poo stank permeated every inch of the plane. People were starting to gag all the way up front. Basically, Dad finally convinced the flight staff that having all the passengers get sick would be infinitely worse, and to let everyone leave, since the poor poop-covered dude was not going to budge until the coast was clear. There wasn't a whole lot he was able to do for the guy otherwise, but I guess at least he spared a bit of his dignity. Oh my god, this has to be one of the best stories here. I don't understand, though, why being drunk means getting poo all over the walls and door. I mean, I've been drunk a lot, but I don't have projectile poops like that. The shrimps from the many shrimp cocktails maybe weren't that fresh and probably caused some food poisoning, hence the gray face, with very wrong digestion that led to an emergency explosive exit. Story 2. Was on a flight to London and the call went out at 5:30 a.m. I went to the back of the plane as directed, and I eventually was told to go to the seat of a passenger. When I got to his seat, he was slow to respond to my questions, but he was alert and could tell me where he was and where he was going. Turns out he was a chronic opioid user for pain and uses benzodiazepines like Ativan for anxiety. Well, he's afraid to fly and anticipated that the rush through the airport would cause more pain, so naturally he doubles up on his opioids, plus his Ativan, plus he decides to have a couple of drinks mid-flight. He was basically so drugged up that his seatmates thought he was having a stroke. The stewardesses asked me if I wanted a captain to land the plane, but because he wasn't in any danger and we were about an hour from London, we just carried on and monitored the man. Just a few days ago, though, I walked into a bank and noticed a man lying beside the ATM. There was someone at the other one who was acting like everything was normal. I told the bank attendant, and we approached the guy. Turns out he was a chronic alcoholic who hadn't had a drink in a while and was in alcohol withdrawal and had a seizure shortly after arriving. I don't know how long he was lying there or why absolutely nobody made mention that there was a man on the ground with vomit beside him. People were walking past him like it was normal. It's surprising and kind of sad how many people don't know how bad alcohol withdrawals can be, so they don't know that the person is at serious risk. I treated a man who was arrested after serial seizures because he tried to quit cold turkey. His wife said that he sobered up because their first grandchild had just been born. That man passed away in the ER, one of my saddest cases. Story 3. Nurse midwife, not a doctor, so whenever the "is there a doctor on board" call goes out, I lay low and hope someone more qualified volunteers. But twice I've admitted I'm a nurse and have been drafted to help. Once I was on a 10-hour red-eye flight. I'm still shocked that on a packed 747, I'm the best they could come up with. Fortunately, it was just a woman having gas pains from sitting still too long and wearing Spanx. I told her to take off the Spanx and walk for a while. For my service, I was given a little gift bag of snacks and alcohol, which was so nice, but kind of embarrassing. Another time was on a city bus, and a man had a seizure. The driver stopped right at the corner adjacent to the local medical school. I thought surely there's some overzealous med student on board who wants to take this one. But no, I finally admitted I was a nurse when the poor driver started to look frantic. All I did was sit with the guy until the paramedics arrived and pointed out that his dentures had fallen on the ground. Fellow nurse here, I was flying home from Cuba and was the only one to answer when they asked for medical professionals. Was a very pregnant woman with abdominal pain, so it would have been perfect for you. But my opinion was more along the lines of a UTI. They asked me later to check a blood pressure on someone else with chest pain, who it turns out was a forensic pathologist the airline gave me. I know gas pain can actually be very excruciating, but even so, depending on the circumstances at least, I do find it pretty funny that someone can be going through such momentary trauma only for it to be instantaneously resolved with a nice long fart. I don't know, there's just something about the immediate contrast between the drama and the comedy of the situation that makes me laugh. But be warned, there are dangers involved. I'm thinking back to the episode of South Park where Kenny was dating a new girl and is holding in his farts until he spontaneously combusts. So proceed at your own risk. Story 4. Flying to an island for a holiday a couple of years ago, the first call was, "Is there a physiotherapist on the plane?" which was predictably followed a couple minutes later by, "Is there a doctor?" A very nice lady had dislocated her prosthetic hip when the man in the seat in front of her reclined sharply into her and she shuffled to adjust her position. She was in agony. The plane had a fairly decent medical kit, so I was able to get an IV cannula into her and give her some reasonable painkillers. However, there was no chance of me popping the hip back in, and where we were going didn't really have a hospital, so I told the crew they'd have to land somewhere that did. Once she'd got off the plane and been taken to the hospital, there was some problem with the sensor or something, and we couldn't take off again, so everyone had to stay overnight in this unexpected destination. Other passengers were not best pleased, and I could not sink far enough into my seat when this was announced. To add to this, the actual destination, which we reached the next day, was a resort that most of the passengers were going to, so I had to endure strangers calling me Doc for the whole week. The lady got her hip sorted and sent me a lovely card once she got home. The flight crew were ace as well, and my partner and I got to visit the cockpit on the return flight. It was the same pilot, and he remembered me. Story 5. I work in imaging, specifically MRI, the big magnet, in a large trauma hospital. While I am BLS and first aid certified, I generally don't jump up unless everybody has that deer in headlights glazed look. I picked up some overtime and was driving home after the extra shift. Around 10:30 p.m., I see a truck on its top and a circle of people watching. Yep, deer in headlights. Might want to make sure whoever in the truck is out, so park my car, hop out in my scrubs, some bystander, "She's a doctor!" Aw crap. No, not a doctor, not even carrying gloves for what I'm about to walk over to see. Poor guy is sitting upright against his upside-down truck, a nice degloved scalp laceration and blood everywhere. Your scalp bleeds forever. A bystander hands me her shirt, and I use that as a makeshift barrier to hold the guy's neck until EMS arrives. Somebody yells for me to stop the bleeding on his scalp. Somebody hands me their belts. Public service announcement, you can't use a belt to stop head bleeding. It's not very nice. Well, sure you can. You just wrap it around his neck like a tourniquet. Okay, that may be overkill. Never mind. In any other situation, I probably would have laughed. I sure hope that guy laughed about it when he got home. I sure did. Just because you saw them use a belt as a tourniquet on some TV show doesn't mean it applies in every scenario. Story 6. I was on a flight recently, and a woman started having a seizure in the route ahead of me. I'm not a medical doctor, but when they asked if there was a doctor on board, literally 7 or 8 people came forward at the same time, including the guy sitting next to me. Apparently, there was a pediatrics conference that they were all going to. It was a really interesting situation to be in, especially since several of the doctors had different opinions on what to do, and the flight attendants were trying to help, but also crowd control all the opinions, mostly because there were some things legally that they couldn't do. The lady having the seizure was fine in the end, and they had people ready when we landed to check her out further. I've shared this before, but it reminds me of this. The American Heart Association, AHA president, who's a cardiologist, had a minor heart attack while at the AHA meeting a year or so ago. It was the day after he gave remarks on his family history of heart disease. Surrounded by a lot of cardiologists, though, he ended up getting a stent. Literally the ideal place to have a heart attack. Story 7. Obligatory not a doctor, but I was sat next to one on a plane from Shanghai to Detroit. About 2 hours into the flight, the announcement comes over the PA. The guy next to me sits bolt upright and looks around for a flight attendant. The look in his eyes said he had been waiting for this moment his entire professional life. Once the doctor's business had been taken care of, the flight attendant stopped by periodically to give him updates, and lots of free miles. Apparently it was a man in his 20s with a history of seizures that had never been to see a doctor about them. The older flight attendants proceeded to give the young man a stern talking to for the remainder of the flight. Wow, he had never seen a doctor about them, or was it he hadn't found a medication that worked effectively? No one likes having seizures. There are many types of seizures, and my heart goes out to him. Hope everyone learns appropriate seizure first aid since there are an overwhelming number of damaging myths. My understanding was that he just dealt with them as they came, and hadn't seen a doctor about them for whatever reason. 12 hours of well-intentioned henpecking may have changed that, though. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.